Hello, and welcome to the weekly voice chat of Men Are Human. We are from menarhuman.com and the Men's Human Rights Discord, the official Discord of the Men's Rights subreddit. So we have a really cool interview today. I'm interviewing Katie. And Katie, as you can see from the title, is both an MRA and a feminist. And Katie is currently in Kenya. And she's going to give us some of her experiences with men's rights and feminism and gender issues in Kenya. And that's really cool because you don't get much of Africa in the media. You don't hear much about African men's issues, women's issues in the media. So this is really cool. So Katie, let me tell you how I usually do interviews, or the one interview I've done. Contrary to what's happening right now, I actually don't like doing much talking. And this is your interview. So there's no such thing as you talking too much. There's no such thing as an answer that is too long. So I'm just going to briefly introduce you, and then we can kind of take it away. So you are currently in school in Kenya, in Nairobi. Is that right?
Yeah, I go to a university in Nairobi, Kenya.
And you are of half Arab and half Indian descent, and you were born in Dubai. Okay.
Yes.
Very cool. And we had a discussion yesterday where you said you used to be purely a feminist, but now you have learned about men's issues, and you consider yourself an MRA as well. Also, Katie, you might want to put your you having a bit of background noise issue. But so you used to be purely a feminist, but then you learned about men's issues, and now you consider yourself both an MRA and a feminist?
Yeah. So I used to be purely feminist before. And I was really critical of the men's rights community. I felt that there was a lot of misogyny and toxicity within the movement. But I was kind of looking at it from like an outsider point of view. And for a long time I was with like the surface level feminism, which is, girls should be able to wear what they want to wear. They shouldn't be shamed and that kind of thing. And then I started looking more deeply into feminist theory, like things like the patriarchy, things like women's discrimination, and historical oppression and that kind of thing, and theories about why men want to oppress women and that kind of thing, like especially the theory that men want to set up the world to benefit themselves at the expense of women. And for a long time I did believe that. Obviously it was something that was painful for me, because no one wants to believe that the world is set up against them and that kind of thing. So again, looking into certain male issues, not necessarily from an MRA perspective, but from a feminist perspective. And I think many MRAs have heard, when they're speaking to a feminist, that whenever they bring up things like the male suicide rate, or men dying more due to murder or injuries or workplace deaths, they usually say it's because of the patriarchy, and the patriarchy backfiring against men, or patriarchy hurts men too, that kind of thing. And for a long time, I believed that. But I really go into studies, into statistics, into data that can actually back up what I'm saying. I don't like so much to go into just theories, which are fine, but they should be either proved or disproved. So I began to look into, men's issues more and more deeply. And what I found is that, if you take the male suicide rate, for example, it's not because men didn't ask for help. It's because they did ask for help and they never got it. Or if they got help, it was not set up in a way to help men, but rather mostly women. So it didn't work for them. I began to look at studies that showed that even when men used the same methods as women, they were still more likely to die, and that suicide prevention programs, they help girls much more than they help boys. Then I began to look at other issues, like boys being punished more at school, boys being punished more by parents, gender symmetry in domestic violence cases, And I just like there was so much that I found that I had been pretty much just ignoring. I was like, it can be either one of two things. Either they want to oppress women, but they're doing like a really bad job of it, or they just don't want to do it at all. So I obviously believe the latter.
Now, you were, I'm going to get back to what caused this transition in your thinking, like what caused you to start to notice things and change specifically. But just first, you had some very detailed statistics yesterday about some gender issues specific to Kenya. Among them were domestic violence rates. Can you kind of give people those stats?
Okay, so for Kenya, first of all, when it comes to domestic violence in Kenya, unfortunately, it's not as rare as in other parts of the world. As of right now, it's 37% of women are victims of domestic violence, and the number is 33% for men. When it comes to sexual violence within relationships, it's 24% for men and 14% for women. So when it comes to sexual violence, it's much higher for women. Sorry, it's much higher for men, and for physical violence, it's slightly higher for women, right? And it
Just
shows
really
that
fast, so the percentage you were giving on sexual violence, the 34% men, that was being victims, right?
24% for men.
24%. So 24% of men are victims.
Yeah.
14% of women for sexual
Yeah.
violence. Okay.
Yeah. So now that's for within relationships, right? And when it comes to things like the suicide rate, in some regions of Kenya, it's 90% men and 10% women, and that's really really skewed, right? But overallly, it's about, I think, 70 to 75% male victims of suicide. Now, in Kenya, when we talk about domestic violence, we usually look at it from, a female victim, male perpetrator lens, and people really do a lot to help female victims. There's a lot of shelters, Mombasa and Nairobi, which are the two main cities of Kenya. There's a lot of awareness being raised for stopping violence against women, and like the vast majority of the men that I've spoken to said that they would not be okay with hitting a woman ever, especially not their wife. And the common consensus in Kenya is that if even if your wife hits you, you shouldn't hit her back. At most you should leave. You know, and unfortunately, there are some parts of Kenya where violence against men is very, very common. Um, there's a part of Kenya, it's called Nyeri. In that region, there's been many stories of wives mutilating their husbands by um, removing their genitals with knives, and pouring hot water on them and burning them, and that, like, it's like torture basically. There was even a famous case where a male politician, he got sent to the hospital because of his wife beating him. So it's becoming more and more common these days.
And what do the police do about it?
Okay, so in the case of extreme violence, like in that example of the wife cutting her husband's genitals off, then the police will intervene. However, that woman, she got only 1 year in prison, which is not that much. For something like mutilating someone, or chopping off their genitals. But usually they won't do anything because men won't even call the police. They don't consider it that big of a deal, if
Right.
their wife hits them.
Okay. So I said I was going to let you talk, but you have so much information. I have to ask you about just a few things. I'm going to ask you in a second, why do you think this is happening in Neri especially? But I just have to go back to something you said, where you said that 24% of men in a relationship experience not domestic violence just, but sexual violence, compared to only 14% of women. That kind of jumped out at me because that's the opposite of how you would think about it. Why do you think there's more sexual violence against men in relationships in Kenya?
Good question. So in Kenya, by the way, just know that rape against boys by older women is very, very common. It's surprisingly common. And the common issue
What
is that
ages? What age are the
um
boys? What age are the women?
maybe for the boys it will be like 18, and the women will be like 25 and above. Um, like the common consensus here is that men usually never refuse to have sex, or that even if a woman forces a man into sex, he's the one benefiting. There's that kind of issue of people thinking that men always want sex, and that kind of thing. So like when a guy is forced into sex, or when he is raped by a woman, he usually will not talk about it. He'll in fact he'll even convince himself that he likes it, or something like that. Now when men are raped by men, or boys are raped by men, they will not talk about it, because in Kenya it's illegal homosexuality is illegal. And in a lot of African countries, they don't consider male on male rape as rape. They'll consider it homosexuality. That could lead to jail time or even death in some African countries. So that's the situation.
Right. Wow, that's shocking. I actually just went on Google now and I looked up domestic violence Nari, and sure enough, all these articles popping up about domestic violence against men. I'm going to put some into the voice chat now. Okay, if people want to go to the discussion channel, I'm going to post some of these links. And I didn't even look up men in the Google search, and I got some of these articles. So why do you think you have this specific problem in Nari in particular? And then we'll talk about all of Kenya, but why Nari in particular has this problem with domestic violence against men?
Okay. First, I just have to correct you. It's Nyeri, not Nari.
Sorry,
um,
yeah, Neri.
yeah. But okay. One of the reasons is that a big number of men in Nyeri drink, right? So they drink alcohol, and the women there feel like if the guy's drinking alcohol, if she doesn't beat him first, he's going to beat her. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason is that um, well, different people from different cities might have different characteristics. And I'm not stereotyping. It's definitely not all women there, but some of the women there are really fierce, and they have like short tempers, right? So it's even when the wife is not being abusive, it's common for her to really yell at her husband a lot, which is um, emotional abuse, right? So it's a common thing there. And another reason is that in Kenya, it's very, very um, common for men in a relationship to be the providers and the protectors. That's a cultural thing here. So if a man is not providing, he could get beaten by his wife, who is disappointed in him. So I'll give you that example of that woman who chopped off her husband's genitals. The reason why she did it is because he was asleep at 5 a.m. in the morning, and she yelled at him and told him to get up and go to work. Even though like 5 a.m. is really, really early for work, even here. And when he told her to leave him alone, that's when she got a knife and mutilated him. So it's a combination of those issues.
Wow. Now, let me ask you, what is the awareness in this environment? What is the awareness people would have about feminism, men's rights, and gender equality? Like, are people conscious of this double standard? Do they think of it as sexist? Are they aware of feminism? What's the dynamic in terms of that?
What I really like is that feminism has really taken off in Kenya. There's been a lot of awareness about, women getting into politics, women having the same education as men, and rape and violence against women is being taken very seriously these days. So there's been a big increase in feminist conscious raising in Kenya, which is good, because now a lot of issues that weren't being looked at before are now being looked at. The bad thing is, because of this, there might be some men who feel like their role of being a provider and protector is being encroached upon, because a lot of men in Kenya, that's where they get their identity from, as being the head of the household or being as the provider and protector. And a lot of them don't even mind women having jobs, women being feminists, women having education and careers outside of the home. The only thing is that they still want to hold on to some gender roles. Even if the woman is really independent and everything, they still believe in that. Now, when it comes to men's rights issues, they really don't care. Not to be mean or anything, but circumcision is very widely practiced in Kenya. I think it's almost 90% of men here are circumcised, and they see it as a good thing. They see it as if a boy is going through some pain when he's going through that procedure, it's part of him becoming an adult. That's how they see it. But FGM is universally hated. No one wants to engage in that practice anymore. When it comes to things like the suicide rate, for men, they don't consider the gender aspect that important. Just say suicide in general is wrong. So like they're a bit oblivious when it comes to men's issues. When it comes to um, violence against men, um, they don't really talk about violence against men except in the context of it being in a relationship, in which case they say it's wrong, but not because it's violent, but rather that the man, he should be like the head of the home, so his wife shouldn't be ordering him around and that kind of thing. But like in reality, they don't do anything about it. Like it's like there's no shelter for men. There was one organization that was raising a little bit of consciousness, but the issue was they were saying that rather than there being no violence against men just because men are human beings, but rather that there should not be violence against men because men are the leaders in the home. So it didn't really take off, and gain much awareness. So yeah.
So you would say that feminists would acknowledge domestic violence against men, but they just don't do anything about it.
I don't think they do. I don't think they know that much about it. Okay, I know about it, but that's because I went out of my way to look at statistics and studies. Um, but apart from that, it's very rarely talked about. There was a time when a lot of feminists were raising issues like violence against women. There would be some men who say, oh, it happens to men too. But then they just fell into the usual dichotomy of, you can't talk about that when I'm talking about violence against women because it's derailing. then even those men who brought it up initially would just go back to ignoring it. So there was so I would certainly say that just like other people, they they do acknowledge that it's an issue and they don't want it to happen, but they don't really do anything about it. But it's not a problem with Kenyan feminists. Rather, it's just with the society in general. Because Kenyan feminists they do believe in gender equality and everything, but they also have to work within the cultural context of of where they're staying. So that's kind of the issue.
So you don't think that feminism is making the issue of domestic violence against men worse? You don't think there's no connection there?
So when I was studying this topic, what usually happens is that you'll find that it's more or how do I say, conservative households to have this problem, because they don't consider it such a big deal if if you beat your husband, because they say that a man cannot really be beaten by a woman, and that kind of thing, so um I think there is some overlap between feminists and people who are okay with hitting men, but there isn't like it's not really a big part of our movement. In fact, what I usually see is that a lot of men, they laugh at the idea of a man being hit by his wife or his girlfriend. Even if it happens, he doesn't take it seriously. But the feminist, if she's there, she'll usually say something like, "No, no, you shouldn't laugh. It's also wrong." And they'll won't actually do anything about it. It's just like lip service, that kind of thing. So yeah.
That's better than a lot of what feminists here would say. So at least there's that. So you obviously now are into the men's rights movement because you've learned about these issues. How big is the men's rights movement in Kenya in general? You said basically very small.
It's non-existent, basically.
So what kind of reactions do you get when you I know we talked also about you're at university and you sometimes have these discussions with your friends, I think you said. So how do people react? How do people react to you, like your friends, your peers, people around you react when you talk about the men's rights movement or you talk about men's issues? What personal interactions and experiences have you had?
Yesterday I was talking about the issue of male suicide with my boyfriend, who is a Kenyan man. He's also part of the Kikuyu tribe, which is the largest tribe in Kenya. And I told him about the fact that 90% of the people who are committing suicide in some parts of Kenya are men. But he told me that he didn't really see a big correlation between the genders and it was just a coincidence. And I tried to explain to him, why there's a gender gap, but he wasn't having it. I mean, I respect his opinion, but I think there is a correlation between the genders. Um, Sorry, between the rate of suicide and gender, because we see the issue is there in almost every single country. I can't name one country where men don't commit suicide more than women. So I definitely do think it's an issue with gender. When I usually talk about issues of domestic violence against men, people are sympathetic, and they also know that it's a little bit cultural, because the Kikuyu tribe is matriarchal, right? Or rather, it used to be matriarchal. So it's not very uncommon to find Kikuyu women being abusive to men. But so when I tell people about this, either are sympathetic.
Hang on, I'm just curious. When you say it's matriarchal, can you tell me
Yeah,
what that
it's
looks? What does that look like?
Oh well, I actually wish it was still matriarchal. So it used to be matriarchal. Um, but since the Christian missionaries came, a lot of Kenya is now Christian, right? Especially many people in the Kikuyu tribe. And then it shifted from matriarchal to slightly patriarchal because, Christians, they say that, men should be the head of the household and that kind of thing. But there's still a big respect for women in the Kikuyu tribe. Out of all the tribes in Kenya, Kikuyu women
What
are
did
the
it?
least.
What did it look like? Sorry, what did it look like when it was matriarchal? Like, how did it work?
The funny thing is, it's pretty ironic, but it pretty much looked like every other patriarchal culture because the women were staying at home. They would do some work, maybe when it's to do with farming. But other than that, they would stay at home and take care of their children while the men were working and protecting them and everything. But when it comes to certain traditions, for example, when it came to dowry, the man would have to give the dowry to the woman and he would have to give a lot of dowry. So, for example, a man who had many daughters, he would become very wealthy if he had many daughters, right? He would become very wealthy because he would receive a lot of dowry. So, the women inside of the home were the heads of that home, right? So they would, use whatever money or resources the man gave to the woman, and she would use it in her home, right? But the men would be leaders outside of the home. That's why you see, even in Kenyan history, it's mostly male politicians and that kind of thing. So yeah, in short, it wasn't much different from other patriarchies in that women were really highly respected in that tribe.
Okay, very interesting. So you've seen a lot of change. By the way, so I'm gonna open up the chat now. If anyone has a question or a comment, so it's kind of an open talk now, but still kind of this is kind of Kate's chat. It's really interesting thinking about this. The way Africa is just ignored by most of the media when there's so much going on. So how is something we talk about in the US and the UK is how men, especially younger men, are starting to fall behind in education and employment. That boys are doing worse in school, boys are doing worse in university, young men are more likely to be unemployed. Does that exist in Kenya?
Oh, sorry, could you repeat that?
Well, something we talk about in the US and the UK is how men and boys are falling behind in education and employment, where boys are doing worse in school and men are less likely to go to university and men are more likely to be unemployed. I was going to ask if that's the case in Kenya. Let me ask, at your university, what is the gender ratio of male to female students?
Okay, so I go to it's a private university, right? So most universities in Kenya are public, and I go to a private university, which means that it's mostly middle class to wealthy students there. And the gender ratio is about 52 to 55% female to slightly less men, right? Now in Kenya overall, when it comes to primary and high school education, girls are doing well. Um, they're slightly more likely to be literate. And last year, in our national exams, which are called KCSEs, the top three students were all girls. So education for girls is really, really, really improving in Kenya. But I would say it's on par, except for one thing. There are some girls, unfortunately, in maybe really poor or rural areas who have to skip school for a few days because they lack some period products. which is really really bad. And the government has been doing so much to help these girls, and so many companies in Kenya are doing a lot for these girls. Like they'll say, if you buy one of our products, we'll donate one, sanitary pad for these girls. So it's a huge amount of awareness for these girls, right? So the gap has pretty much vanished, and now girls are even slightly ahead. Not such a big difference, but slightly ahead. When it comes to university education, men are still more likely to go to university than women are. However, this is not necessarily due to discrimination, because there's no discrimination when it comes to universities. Almost, actually, all universities in Kenya accept women. There's even a few that accept only female students, right? And there's a lot of scholarships for female students, and that kind of thing. So a lot of push. However, because of this expectation of men being the head of the household, or men having to provide for women, men are still more likely to go to university than women are. Now, this is, of course, I want more women to go into university. However, in Kenya, women are much less likely than men to be homeless, and I think 9 out of 10 street kids in Nairobi are male, right? So, and unfortunately, there's still more child.
Street kids meaning homeless.
Um, yes, homeless, and these children. I maybe you don't have them in Western countries, of course, but in Africa, there's a lot of kids who have to walk around, um, either begging or selling, small things to make money, and they're called street kids, right? So 9 out of 10 street kids are male, right? Because it's raised that expectation of them to work even when they're really really young. And of course, we know that most child laborers are male, even in Kenya. So there are issues relating to education, because obviously these boys, they don't access education, you know. So there needs to be work on both sides.
Okay, so because the perception in the West, if you talk to an American, Kate, you might want to mute your mic for a second. There's a lot. There's always we got to fix the audio issues, because that doesn't happen on the most places where there are open chats. That doesn't happen, but for some reason, Discord always has an issue with audio. So it's really annoying. It's not you. It happens to all of us here. So I am going to open. I know Not wants to say something. But yeah, because the perception in the Western countries, a Western feminist, and I would say even not a feminist, most people in America, the perception would be in Africa, girls aren't allowed to go to school, and it's only boys going to school, and women aren't allowed to go to university. Americans and Europeans have a very ignorant view of Africa. Everybody's view of Africa, is like huts and hunting lions, and people don't realize that African nations are developed nations. But that's the perception that people have of Africa, is that it's purely anti-women, and it's all misogynistic, and they think it's similar to like the Taliban in Afghanistan, and that people really just don't have any idea what they're talking about, which is a shame. So yeah, we're gonna open the chat now. I know Not, there's something that you wanted to say.
Yeah, so you highlighted, period products limiting how much girls can get an education, but then you said that there have been certain actions taken, like subsidizing it by if you buy one, we'll donate one, and the gap had disappeared. So is it currently the case that pretty much everyone has access to period products and that's not a limiting factor in education, or?
Right now, okay, there's still a few girls who have that issue. However, it's really really disappearing. It's almost always it's almost gone right now, because right now, for the literacy rates in Kenya, they're 88% for boys and slightly higher for girls, right? So like 88.5 or something like that. So Kenya has really, really high literacy rates, especially for an African country. And I would just like to talk a little bit about what Blue Orange said. Um, yeah, I completely understand that many people, they think that people in Africa are still like living in mud huts and that kind of thing. It's not true. The vast majority of us live in urban areas. Women, hitting a woman, especially if you're a stranger, it's universally hated and looked down upon. I think that if many people were asked about, yeah, they'd say, oh, women, they are just being beaten like dogs. No, we're not. It's very, very rare. It's very, very rare. um and women have all the same rights as men in Kenya, all of the same rights. We are allowed to participate in government. We can own property. We can vote. We got the right to vote the same time as men did in 1963 when we became independent from the British Empire. So we have all of our rights here. In 2015, they passed a really, really strong law against domestic violence, saying that it's not just illegal to stop your wife from leaving the house, or it's not just illegal to hit your wife, it's illegal to make your wife or your husband do anything that they don't want to do. You can't steal their money, you can't stop them from accessing their bank account, you can't stop them from using the family car and that kind of thing. So Kenya has really, really progressed. It still has issues, yes, but it's still progressed. The only thing I would say is, like in relation to men's rights, there's so much circumcision here that it's normalized. Like it's very, very, very normal. Like it's almost impossible to find a guy, especially guys from, like, yeah, basically it's almost impossible to find a guy who is not circumcised. It's very, very common here. And
Just
things
curious,
like,
is there
yeah.
any? So you said it's very common, and so most men are happy about it there. Most men like it. They think it's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Most men really like it, even though it's painful. They view it as like something that they should be proud of. Like, okay, let me very quickly tell you about the shaming that happens in Kenya. So traditionally, a boy, especially in the Kikuyu tribe, has to go and be circumcised when he's 14 years old, right? So before he turns 14 and before he's circumcised, is really, really ignored or bullied in a passive aggressive way by the adults. There's even a tribal insult, which basically means uncircumcised man. So as in, like, being uncircumcised for a man is so bad that it's literally an insult. um they they wouldn't, like, for example, if a guy who's maybe 13 walks into a room with adult men, they'll say, we need to talk adult things, here. But when you become circumcised, that changes. Like, people treat you like a man, like an adult man. So they get so much pride from that. And I mentioned the fact that that's kind of social pressure. It's not entirely consensual if you're pressured into it. They were like, you know what, it's a good thing, we don't even mind. So that's the situation here.
Uh, I I heard that paternity fraud is a big thing in Kenya.
Could you repeat that?
I heard that paternity fraud is very common in Kenya.
Did you say
Uh,
paternity fraud?
yeah. Do they have that there?
Yeah,
Let me
If
think.
okay, just
I mean,
I'm
it's
not sure
high
what the law
in Kenya, I think.
in the U.S. and the U.K. for paternity fraud. Just to kind of give you some context, what he's talking about, and in India too, and it's 10 times worse in India. It's quite scary, actually. It's when mothers can collect money, they can collect child support for children. But there are some scams and some frauds where mothers will accuse a father of being mothers will accuse a man of being the father of her children when he's not the father of his children. But even though he's not the father, he's still forced to pay her money and child support. Even when, in some crazy cases, the man was able to prove by a DNA test that he wasn't the father, he still had to pay child support. That happened in Kenya?
Okay, I would just like to say that in our country, Kenya, it's very, very uncommon to have children without being married. Okay, there are some cases like that. However, in
Even if you are married to someone, paternity fraud can still happen. Like a woman says that a child is his husband's, but isn't actually. And some countries and some places has law that if both persons were married, the child born out of the wedlock is the husband's, even if DNA test proves that he isn't. And from what I have seen and heard, Kenya has like the highest or second highest cases of paternity fraud.
Oh, I honestly didn't know that. I didn't even consider anything about paternity fraud. But I'll look into it. But right now, what I do know, what I do know about this issue is that they're trying to introduce a law, or they're going to. I think it's going to take effect next year, if I'm not wrong. That fathers who divorce the mothers, they're still liable to pay child support. And that's because there's a lot of men in Kenya who just abandon their families. Okay, not that many, but some of my friends. It's happened to some of my friends that the father, he would go have a child with a woman in Kenya, then just move to another country and have another child there. So they're kind of to stop that, or at least saying that he'll be liable, and he's going to be liable to up to 50% of his income. He has a child and then just leaves the woman, and that kind of thing.
Whereas in paternity fraud, even if the kid is not biologically a man's, even if a man doesn't even know the woman, he can still be held accountable for the child support, and that's not even the worst cases. In the worst cases, let's just say a wife had an affair, and the husband knew about it and or didn't knew about it. So, in cases where he knew about it, even if he filed for divorce, he will still be asked to pay child support because child was born or conceived during the marriage or in other form. There have been cases that the man found out after countless years of paying child support or taking care of the kid that he wasn't actually the biological father of the kid. It's probably one of these things that actually left me really disturbed that something like that can happen, and there are no consequences for it.
Wow, that's really really interesting to hear about. I didn't even consider the fact that some people would cheat. I mean, of course, I know that some people do that, but like, I didn't really consider it. So for example, a woman could cheat on her husband, and then, or not even on her husband, just on someone that she's in a relationship with. Then she could just say, this is your child, so now you have to pay child support. Um, so let me ask, if in a country like India, if he can have a DNA test to show that he's not the father, and he shows it to a judge, will the judge make a reversal or
Judge
something?
will probably ignore it. Judge will probably ignore it, and if man doesn't pay child support, he will go to jail.
Wow, that happens even in India. I had no idea.
Happens in the U.S. too. Man can go to jail for that. But so let me ask you, Kate. So it seems like Kenya it's obviously more traditional, I would say, than the United States when it comes to relationships. So let me ask you, what happens in divorce in Kenya in terms of if you have something like alimony, splitting assets, inheritance, all that? How does divorce work legally in Kenya?
So first of all, I would just like to say that okay, it used to be traditional, but this generation, my generation, they're very, very untraditional, right? So that is something that happens, right? So it's you can find many people these days who have relationships or dating before getting married and that kind of thing. How divorce works in Kenya is essentially that Kenyan law is like having a prenuptial agreement, you know, like you aren't entitled to your spouse's money or land or anything like that. However, what is very, very common in Kenya is that usually when a couple divorces, the man will give the woman something. This is in tradition, he usually maybe give her some money or some land. And this is just done out of a courtesy because you could have a case where a woman is she's been a housewife her whole life and she would find it difficult to support herself now that they're divorced. So he usually gives her something so that she at least can be independent. And that's how it is. However, these days many people are more modern. So like it also happened to my mother. My mother got divorced in Kenya. She didn't take anything from my dad, but she just went back to working full time, and that's how it was.
So, oh, should I go? Yeah, okay. So I have like three main questions about everything you've said so far. One of them was to do with you were saying domestic violence is much higher for men or much more severe in Nyari, was it? I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. That seems really strange to me, just because I've always viewed domestic violence as like a human nature thing, and then like gender roles can affect it. So to hear that in a particular area that it's like significantly different is just a bit strange. And you also mentioned about sexual violence being like higher for men in Kenya generally, I believe, within relationships, I think. And I was wondering, like, what forms of sexual violence that would be. So, like, is it like rape or is it like sodomy or yeah? Yeah, it seems true for sure. I was just curious, like, why that would be.
Well, to answer your first point, okay, it's it depends on a lot of things. You can find a place where domestic violence is more common and a place where it's not. Like for example, in countries like the US, it's only about a quarter of women who have been victims of domestic violence, and I think same for men. But when you go to a place like Afghanistan, you'll find like at least 40%, for people of both genders. So it's common to find. In some places it's more pronounced for people to be victims of domestic violence. But as for your second point, so what the survey said is that this woman, this researcher, she was asking men if they've ever been forced into sex, if they've ever been raped by their wives, if they've ever been, basically forced to have sex against their will, and 24% said yes. So yeah, it was surprising to me to find that it was higher for um, men than for women. However, I'm not really surprised because these days almost no one thinks it's okay to rape your wife. Literally no one. Like there might be some people who are okay with hitting your wife lightly, which is still wrong, but raping your wife, no one thinks it's okay at all to do it anymore. But if it's a man, they might be like, oh, he probably liked it. There's that regular line of thought. So I guess that's one of the reasons why it's higher for men than for women.
Hey, Katie, I was just wondering if we could ask you some questions about your experiences with feminism, and just to bring us back onto the main topic of the stream, which was your experiences regarding like the divide between MRAs and feminists, like socially.
Of course, I don't mind. You can ask me anything about that.
Sure. Could you maybe, if you haven't mentioned anything from our DM conversation, would you like to maybe mention some of that?
Oh, sure. So, just to summarize, I've been a feminist for a really, really long time. So because I'm a woman, naturally, I'm going to see some of the things that affect women. I'm going to be upset about them, about the fact that there are some communities which consider it okay for a man to date, but for a woman to date, it's wrong. I'll look at that and I'll say, that's sexist against women, right? And that kind of thing. So naturally, you'll have more experience seeing it firsthand if you're a woman. Second of all, when we have a case, right, where in the world, almost every single country, um, men and women have more empathy for women, and they hate the idea of violence against women, and they have generally more empathy for women than for men. Really, really, really going to highlight the suffering of women or any problems that women have. They're going to maybe not ignore but minimize the issues that men have. There's also things like the women are wonderful effect, which says that people associate more good qualities with women than with men. And there's also things like the gamma bias,
Sorry,
which
I just have to interrupt. I brought up the women wonderful effect. I brought up that exact point with Sam Cedar.
yeah. So this is all real things that have been documented in a study, and or rather in several studies. So these are all real things. So like for example, when I was growing up, I see article upon article about how women in this part of the world were treated badly and how women in that part of the world were treated badly. Or I'll see like for example, like let me give you an example, right? So if you see something like the coronavirus is affecting women in particular badly, you're going to be like, wow, this world is really sexist against women. But when you see things like men are more likely to die from coronavirus than men, than women, then you're even wondering why they would choose to focus on women instead of men. So I don't know how to describe. You're a woman and you're reading countless articles talking about how women are oppressed and women have it worse. You're going to have kind of bitterness. Not a bitterness, but sadness. Because you'll end up feeling like the whole world is against you and that kind of thing. So that's how I was feeling. No one likes to feel like that, of course. So I really, really got into the feminist theory about the fact that men are more powerful than women. Women have next to no power, and men have all the power, and that men use that power and that influence to essentially just benefit themselves at the expense of women, and they delight in the suffering of women and that kind of thing. And that's what I believed for a really, really long time. And of course it was horrible, and I really wanted to defend the rights of women. So of course I was a pretty radical feminist. Then I began to question certain things. Of course I question everything. I'm just that kind of person. Even feminism, even if I'm a feminist, I'll still question it. And I found that there were so many things that were untrue, that were just being said again and again and again. Like, let me give you an example. Now feminists have a big problem with putting forth a theory. There's nothing wrong with putting forth a theory, but if it's disproved or unproven, then it's wrong to keep talking about it. But feminists used to have a theory which was called the double punishment theory, which stated that if a woman commits a crime, she's going to be punished for that crime, and also for breaking traditional gender norms. Essentially, that women were going to be punished harsher than men for the same crime, right? I believe that, of course, it sounds plausible. If you believe that women are an oppressed class, then yeah, they're going to receive harsher punishments for the same crime. Later on, I found that it wasn't even true. That is actually the opposite. There's a big sentencing disparity, but it's in favor of women. Women get much shorter sentences for the same crime, especially when there are sexual offenses. So like, I just couldn't keep ignoring the evidence anymore. Then I began to read books like The Privileged Sex by Martin Van Creveld and The Myth of Male Power by Warren Farrell. You know, like, that's when I saw that essentially, people tend to really ignore the problems of men, and they tend to focus, with precision on the problems of women. The point where if there's something that is blatantly discriminatory against men, they just twist it into being discriminatory against women, which is probably why I feel like almost everyone agrees that women are oppressed and men are privileged, because people, like, they see things in a really, really, really pro female way. Like another example of this I can tell you is that when you looked at what happened to Boko Haram, when I used to get coverage of this thing, I would feel like these people, these men, they hate women, and they hate women so bad that they want to kidnap little girls from school. They want to stop them from getting an education. So as a woman, you're obviously going to read about that and feel bad about it. No, not even, I didn't even see a single article talking about the boys that they kidnapped. And I later found out that they kidnapped over 10,000 boys, made them into child soldiers. Not just that, but they were even entering schools and outright killing the male students, and and keeping the female students alive. So, when everything is set up to make it look like women have it worse, then obviously many people are going to believe that, you know. So, that's my issue with it, because honestly, I just don't think that it's healthy for girls to be brought up thinking that men hate them, and that the whole world is against them, and that men will literally kill them for trying to get an education, because that's just not true, you know. I just think it's wrong.
That's everything she's talking about?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, they were, as I was saying in the thing, they burned more boys to death than they kidnapped girls during that, the famous kidnapping. And last Christmas, they kidnapped just as many boys as they did before with girls, and nobody seems to be paying any attention to it. Like, there's no bring back our boys.
Yeah, and what infuriates me about that is when you try and bring up the boys, they say, oh, you're just doing a whataboutism, or you're just doing a what about the boys. Yeah, actually, what about the boys that are being ignored and tortured and murdered? I mean, what about the 8-year-olds that are being kidnapped and killed?
This is why I don't like the derailing thing. But yeah, okay, to get on with Casey. You said in the chat that you got very deep into feminist theory, and you said like you broke free of it. Did you ever have interactions with other feminists? Did they, have you ever like done any gender studies sort of stuff or anything like that, or anything at college, anything like?
Oh, thank God I haven't. I've never attended a gender studies class. I did listen to someone who was talking about their experience in gender studies in the gender studies class, and it was a bunch of hogwash, about like that it's just general feminist theory. The thing is, I don't know if anyone here has ever read feminist theory. It's really, really pessimistic, like absurdly pessimistic. It's like, okay, thing is, I wouldn't even mind it being pessimistic if it was for the purpose of revealing the truths, of the oppression in society. But a lot of it is not even true. A lot of it is just not even true. Like it's someone's opinion, which is, based on their own personal interpretation of something, which turned out to not even be true. Like, for example, just the other day, I was reading Marxist views of women's oppression. One of the Marxists, and this is a male Marxist, by the way, he says that men forced women into being feminine, and women don't actually want to be feminine. It's just that men will beat them or will oppress them if they're not feminine, which is just blatantly false. I think you guys should read about the kibbutz gender equality experiment. Okay, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing the tribe correctly, but the kibbutz, they're a group of people in Israel, and they did a kind of social experiment where they raised boys and girls exactly the same in a very, very egalitarian way. And they said that men and women have to do all the same things. If men have to work on the field, women should also work in the field. If men are in government, women should also be in government. Basically, everyone is just going to be equal. What they found, interestingly enough, is that women actually led the charge in saying, we don't want to have an egalitarian lifestyle. We'd rather be more feminine, do more feminine jobs. The truth is, like, women just in general, they really appreciate, having safe jobs, having more emotionally fulfilling jobs. They like spending time with their children, and that kind of thing. It's not based on men bullying them into doing those things. It's just based on their own personal choice. We can even see this in countries like Sweden, Denmark, Norway, where they have a lot of resources, and those countries are very egalitarian. They have equality of opportunity. And even in those countries, women are more likely to go into separate fields than men. So I don't think I don't think it's just because of sexism or discrimination that women do certain things. People, they have this big problem, and with a lot of feminists in particular, they always assume that women have no choice or no agency in anything that we do, and anything that happens to us is just oppression. You know. Okay, I'm just going to quickly go over something before you guys ask me anything else, if you allow me.
Was really, really fast, just to the point you just said. That is exactly what I've said so many times. It's not sexist to say that there are some gender stereotypes that exist for a reason. If you took 1 million men and 1 million women and you followed them over 10 years, you would start to see some statistical patterns and trends. You would see that men are overall more likely to be interested in hunting, for example, and women are more likely to be interested in makeup. It doesn't mean that women can't be interested in hunting and men can't be interested in makeup. It doesn't mean that you should be shamed for that. It's simply acknowledging that there will be some statistical trends that you will notice among gender. It's nothing. It's a good thing or a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with not following that trend, but it's just those.
Yeah, exactly. My job as a feminist is to ensure that if a woman wants to have makeup as a hobby, or if she wants to do hunting as a hobby, she should be welcome to. I also like hunting, coincidentally. I just think that everyone, especially women who have some traditionally masculine hobbies, they should be allowed to do them, or go into fields that have a lot of men in them, just as long as they have equal opportunity. Then it's going to be fine, right? And one of the issues that I was going to talk about is some kind of catch-22s that I don't like within the feminist community. Like, for example, if a man is unkind to a woman, then let's say, for example, he hits her, or he pushes her, or he discriminates against her, it's an example of hostile sexism, which is totally wrong, and everyone agrees that it's wrong. But if a man does something good for a woman, like he opens the door for her or pays for her dinner or something like that, they'll say it's benevolent sexism. So, like, it's like, I just don't see it that way. But it's kind of like, so are men not supposed to interact with women at all? Because, like, when they do something good, it's like benevolent sexism, but when they do something bad, it's like hostile sexism. So it's like, I just don't like those, this concept of benevolent sexism. I don't think you can be sexist to someone by being nice to them. That doesn't make any sense. But, like, it's such a big thing in the feminist community, and I just don't know why. But then, when you ask someone to explain the concept of benevolent sexism, they usually say it's men's way of basically, I don't know, like, making the patriarchy seem appealing to women. But, like, let's be honest, no one wants to do that. No one's having that intention in mind when they're doing something nice for a woman. That's just my opinion.
I can give you a bit of perspective on that. Because, yeah, like, I'm friends with quite a few feminists, and what they've told me is that essentially what they would prefer is that men treat women the same ways that they treat men, basically. And that effectively benevolent sexism makes it so that men make lots of effort towards women. So, like, for example, let's say you buy the dinner, you've approached them, you've, like, bought them drinks, you've, like, paid for all the dates for ages and ages and ages. And then, like, maybe after a while, if the woman's like, well, I'm not feeling it anymore, and she, like, backs away, then, well, the guy's going to be upset because he's like, oh, I put all this work in. And that's kind of reinforcing, like, a kind of sexual gender role that, they'd rather not have. They'd rather just have it be that they pay for the dates. They, like, pursue men and women equally, like, all of these sorts of things. But so one thing you mentioned quite a while ago was to do with mental health support for suicidal men not being as effective for men as it is for women, and that there isn't a lot of support for men. So I was just wondering, like, in general, so, like, what changes could feasibly be done? Like, hypothetically, if you were a legislator or you were in charge of funding or something, what changes could be made that would significantly like, reduce the severity of a severe male issue, or, like, increase the well-being of men in general quite a bit? Like, is there any big solutions that would improve things quite a lot?
Thanks for that, Not. Well, I just like to say that, to your first point about benevolent sexism, yeah, I agree. It's totally wrong for a guy to, like, kind of pressure a woman into sex. It's not right. It's definitely not right. However, it's not just about someone paying for someone's dinner. It's also about a guy like holding a door open for a woman. I think if a guy expected sex for holding a door for a woman, then he's insane. And like that's very rare. I've never heard of a guy who expects sex just for doing that. But even they would say that that is an example of benevolent sexism. But as for your second, or rather, as for your question about mental health, so long-term and short-term solution. Short-term solution would be looking into ways that can improve the effectiveness of this of psychotherapy for men. Now, I've heard someone say that sitting down and talking about your issues is more of a woman oriented thing rather than for men. And what I found when I was researching this topic is that when they were polled, over 50% of men dropped out of therapy early. The biggest reason they did this because they felt it wasn't working for them, right? And I heard about this program which seemed to work so much better that a bunch of men got together and they went and chopped some wood or did some like traditionally masculine activity, and it did wonders for their mental health, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with women enjoying to sit down and talk about their issues, you know. But if men prefer a different type of mental health program, that kind of thing should also be provided, but it's not really readily provided. So that's what I would do in the short term. Long-term solution needs to be a lot different, because we need to ask ourselves, why is it that men need to majorly shoulder the burden of providing for their families? Why is it that men tend to um, not seek help until they're severely depressed? And first of all, men don't even attempt to seek help when they are depressed. And we can see this by the lack of male representation in depression statistics, right? Because right now it says that more women than men are diagnosed with depression, but we can see that men are also having an issue with depression, which means that they're not going to someone who can diagnose them with depression, right? And also we need to get rid of this attitude that men should be stoic. I just don't agree with that. The culture needs to change. Because a lot of this is cultural. That men need to be stoic. I have a lot of male friends, and they all tell me that they feel pressured to being stoic. And I think that we should work towards eliminating that expectation.
So do you think what you were talking about, the men who went out and did a masculine activity like chopping wood, do you think the current system for therapy and psychotherapy is designed in a way that doesn't work as well for men?
Oh, absolutely. I've heard the phrase psychotherapy was created by men to treat women. Um, so, what I found when I was researching the history of treatment of mentally ill people, what I found is that throughout most of the periods, when it was really bad and torturous, like for example those old pictures of people being locked up in asylums and being tortured and that kind of thing, it was mostly men at that time. But when more women started um being having fits of hysteria, which they called it in those days, they started kind of becoming more lenient towards people with mental health issues, because no one thinks it's okay to treat a woman like a dog. People are more obviously more sensitive to these things when it's a woman who needs help. Then when it came to the World War I and the World War II, there was an increase in therapy for men, And I use that term really loosely because what they called therapy was just electrocution, you know? They literally used to electroshock the men, right? And it wasn't done to really help them, but rather it was done just to get them back on the battlefield. You know, at that time they used to call it shell shock, you know, when men used to suffer from, you know, what we call PTSD, right? So they used to call it shell shock. And then with Freud, who made psychotherapy more popular, he worked mostly not just with women but with wealthy women, because he used to charge $50 an hour, which was a lot in those days, right? So it was mostly women, especially upper class women, that he was treating, right? So it really evolved into being something that was created to benefit women, but not men, you know? So that's where we're at now. I've been to therapy. It was really, really effective for me. It was super, super effective. But I'm wondering if it would work the same for men, because men and women psychologically are different, right? So what works for men may not work for women, and vice versa. You know?
That's very interesting. I didn't actually know that about Freud.
Yeah, no, that was super interesting about the history of asylums, essentially. You pointed out like the like masculine activity versus therapy, and like masculine activity is more effective. One thing that I've heard about in therapy, there's been a big statistical analysis that shows essentially that if the therapist believes that masculinity is like negative and harmful, then they don't like use that drive and motivation to be masculine to get men to engage in positive behaviors, and those tend to be much less effective therapists. So it's possible that reinforcing positive masculinity is like really helpful for men's mental health. But yeah, so you've mentioned about like that we could push for that to be more widely available to men, so like signposting it and like making it more funded, like more common. But is there any other like big solutions for like other issues that you pointed out? So like you've talked about domestic violence, you've talked about street kids, talked about sexual violence, and plenty of other things.
Well, like that's why I got really shocked when I was researching this topic. I mean, the topic of men's issues in general, because like if you'd ask old me, you know, I'd probably just say men's issues. No, men don't have issues. That's not something that happens. So, like, wow, was I wrong? Like the amount of issues that men have, or that disproportionately affect men, is just insane. You know. So, like, I've already talked about the suicide rate. Um, we've already talked about the gap in education that's emerging in several countries. There's men being more likely to be raped in certain situations, especially prison, and that's just ignored, completely ignored. We can talk about the sentencing disparity, the fact that men get much longer sentences for the same crime. We could talk about police brutality. Now, what I find interesting about police brutality is that African Americans are, and this is horrible, 3 times more likely to be killed by a police than someone of another race, especially a white person. Right now, this is in the U.S. But when men are 22 times more likely to get killed by a police person, or a police officer, than a woman, no one even mentions that. No one knows that it's a thing. No one knows it's even happening. You know Maybe they kind of know it, but they just ignore it. We could talk about the fact that
I actually
um,
did. I did a video on that. The figure I saw was 19 times more likely. But either way, 19 or 22. The fact that it's more than double, roughly double, 10 times as likely. So not twice as likely, not 3 times as likely, basically 20 times as likely. It's completely insane. Yet no one, and like you said, nobody talks about it. So when I see a black woman at a Black Lives Matter protest, and she's talking about how she has this unique risk, I can't help but feel a little bit of resentment towards her, because I'm actually significantly more likely than you to get shot by the police. So you have absolutely no right to tell me that I have privilege in this area. And I did check, by the way, if someone wants to watch my video, I made absolutely sure that the gender disparity is true for every single race. It gets closer than 19 times when it's a white man and a black woman, but it holds up for every single race. At least in the US, a man of any race is more likely to be killed by police than a woman of any race.
It's not just killed as well. It's also more likely to be stopped by the police, more likely to be stopped and searched, more likely to have use of force on you, like all sorts of things. More likely to be charged. Yeah. But yeah, like the differences between like men and women are generally larger than like black and white. Generally, black men suffer for being black and for being men. So like white women, I fucked that up, but yeah. Right.
Yeah, I actually got kicked off a moderator team for saying that men were like more likely to get killed and things like that. But yeah, Catalina.
From where?
Caitlin, sorry.
You said kicked off a moderating team from where?
Oh, it was on another Discord. I won't mention the name.
Was it political in nature?
Nope.
Okay.
But
wow.
the debate was.
And so what did you say?
Yeah,
You just brought up the disparity, the gender disparity in police killings. And just like that, they ban you?
It was a bunch of stuff like that. I can hear a lot of noise on your mic, by the way.
Sorry, I'm cutting
it was a bunch of, yeah, better watch out for cutting stuff and that. But it was a bunch of stuff like stats to do with men being killed more and so on. They were the ones who brought up saying men were privileged and stuff like that. And it didn't matter how many stats I brought up. It didn't matter if I even like borderline got them to admit that men have it a lot worse in a lot of ways. They were just like, yes, but like men are still privileged, and they couldn't actually articulate how. Like they couldn't give me an example. They couldn't like explain it. They were like, just give me 2 weeks and I'll come back and I'll explain. If you need 2 weeks to like counter the amount of stuff that I was giving them, then maybe think about if you're wrong. It's it should be fairly obvious if something like that is untrue or if it's true, because it's just like you just go through the stats, and if it's true, it's true. If it's not, it's not. But
yeah, I'm seeing some new people, by the way. I'm seeing Arrogant Ambassador. I don't think I've seen you in this chat before. Right now we are interviewing Kate. You see Kate Lease is her username. She's a feminist and an MRA who lives in Kenya, talking about some male issues. Do you have, Ambassador, would you like to ask any questions or introduce yourself? Or
I was just listening in, actually. I mean, if I have any questions, I'll direct them to you. But so far, so good. No questions at all.
And I know you came late, so this actually is being live streamed to YouTube. So I can send you the link to the video so you can watch it from the beginning if you'd like.
Yes, please, if you could.
So Kate, I can't wait for our video interview. I'm actually happy we did this first, because now it kind of gives me a better idea of what questions to ask. We can kind of organize it a little bit. But this is incredible. I'm not saying we're finished. This was incredible. It's eye-opening. It's so cool to hear social issues in Africa because, again, you just don't hear Africa much in the media. Are there any other gender issues in Kenya that we haven't asked that you'd like to talk about?
Thank you for that. Yeah, so in Kenya, I would say in relation to gender, unfortunately, there are still some pretty violent rapes that sometimes happen. Still some cases of victim blaming against women, which is totally, completely wrong. There's a fact that um, there's really problems on both sides, right? So for men, I would say that men in Kenya are much more likely to be murdered than women. Like they're about 77% of the people who are murdered in Kenya, right? They are, like I said, 90% of people who are um, committing suicide in some parts of Kenya, right? They also live 5 years longer, 5 years shorter than women do in Kenya, right? So it's a lot higher for women, There's also the fact that women work less hours than men in Kenya, right? So women are more likely to be, stay-at-home moms, for example. Um, I know that most if you ask most people, they wouldn't really consider it a privilege to be a stay-at-home mom or a housewife because they have a pretty bad reputation right now. But work in Kenya is hard for a lot of people. So if a woman, she has the option to be a stay-at-home mom or a housewife, I consider it a good thing, right? Meanwhile, the man has no option to do that at all, especially in Kenya. It's unheard of for a woman to support her husband, and even if she makes more money than him, he will still continue working. That's how it is. Um, Fortunately, because of like the traditional attitudes, men are raped, boys are raped or sexually abused. Men face violence from women, and they never talk about it. They never receive any help. There's I mean, okay, some people acknowledge that men can be raped, but it's almost universally ignored. And there's no shelter for men. Oh, before I forget, men are also much more likely to be homeless in Kenya. An astounding 88% of homeless people in Kenya are men. 88. Then there's also a certain percentage of children, which could also include boys. So like if I'm to estimate, it's almost 90 or over 90% of the people who are homeless in Kenya are males. You know and boys are more likely to be child laborers in Kenya. Some of them even drop out of school to become child laborers. So it's that kind of situation. It's Men are much more likely in Kenya to work really dangerous jobs. Like construction worker. Work in the fishing industry, right? So is that kind of those kind of issues that really happen in almost every single part of the world. you know so yeah, that's the situation right now.
So you said before that there's basically no men's rights movement in Kenya. Do you foresee that maybe changing? Do you see maybe the men's rights movement growing in the next few years?
I mean, well, I'm no soothsayer, but perhaps there could be a bit of men's rights movement. However, if it's not woman friendly, if it's not feminist friendly, it has a big chance of being squashed. um, because like no one in Kenya wants anything bad to happen to women, and there's this attitude that anything that is harmful to women is really really bad. You know? And because because people in Kenya are so traditional, just not ready to hear that men could actually be getting the short end of the stick on certain things, because here's the thing, they might not even consider that a bad thing, because they're like, you know what, we're men, we're supposed to die for our families, we're supposed to provide for them, how can you say that that's a bad thing? And they're just not ready to give up that identity, you know in my opinion, if you want to be a feminist or even a men's advocate, you have to have at least a somewhat flexible view of gender roles. You can't always say that men and have to be the providers and the protectors, because I actually wrote an article about this explaining why gender roles are bad for men, right? Because men in Kenya, they have to work just punishing hours, doing the worst jobs, provide for their family. They might even end up dying because of that. They have to do a lot for their family. You know, they have to put themselves in harm's way because of their family, right? And men are just not going to give that up anytime soon. So I feel like if there is going to be a men's rights movement, it's mostly going to focus on things like the male suicide rate and violence against men, and that kind of thing. But I still think that people in Kenya need to get used to the theory, or rather the opinion, that men's identity is not wholly dependent on being the provider and the protector, But like I said, it's going to be a bit of a struggle.
Quick question: is birth control very available and cheap in Kenya? So, like condoms, like IUDs, morning after pills, like etc. All those.
Yeah, yeah. Here's the thing. In Kenya, things like condoms, it's like yeah, yeah. These pills are very, very available. However, abortion is illegal in Kenya, right? Like I said, it's a very Christian country, and they might view abortion as something akin to like murdering a baby. I disagree with that, but like abortion is banned, but other forms of birth control like condoms and stuff, yeah, they're readily available.
Okay, that's great. That makes a huge difference in like the reduction of gender roles over time, I think. Another thing that makes a huge difference is if there's paid maternity leave and paternity leave. So if a man and a woman is both working, even if the man is working and earning the majority of the money, if he can get a full pay and get time off, and if he doesn't do that, then they're just going to lose out on free money because they each have their own leave for having a child. Then it's such a huge step in like normalizing men being at home. But you also mentioned sexual violence. You mentioned homeless men and street kids and child laborers. So are there any like, obviously those are massive problems. Is there anything, what do you think would help the situations, like police policies potentially, I don't know, better therapy for people who have suffered sexual violence, or I don't know. Yeah.
Well, firstly, I would just like to agree with you that gender roles can be I say that people can normalize foregoing them in relation to birth control being available. In Kenya right now, if you work in a formal company, they most likely will have some sort of maternity leave or paternity leave um, policies, including paid maternity leave. However, unfortunately, a lot of Kenyans work in the informal sector. Things like taking products and going and selling them. Or fixing cars. Like on the sidewalk. A big portion of Kenyans work in the informal sector, and companies, well, it's not even called companies, but like businesses in the informal sector, they have no policies of maternal leave and paternity leave, or paternal leave. So it's still an issue, unfortunately, because, like I said, many people work in the informal sector, right? So that's the issue. So probably a woman who's pregnant and she's working in the informal sector, she'll probably still be working, for a long time. She'll only take off a short time amount to have her baby and then go continue working, and like she'll carry her baby in like little not a basket, but like she'll tie it up in a lasso, right, which is a piece of cloth, and then she'll carry it on her back, right, and she'll leave the baby there the whole day while she's working and stuff. And that's how some people live in Kenya. However, when it comes to the companies, they have paternal leave, but it's very, very short. It's like 2 weeks max, or even 1 week, which is like, it doesn't do anything. It's too short.
It's similar here as well in the UK.
It's kind of crazy they keep the babies on their backs all day. I mean, babies starved for attention and like interaction and learning just like stagnate.
I mean, what are you going to do? You got to get that bread, right?
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, sorry, I was just interrupting you to agree with you. Like, please continue.
Me or Katie, but I'm done. Katie, carry on.
Yeah, so basically that's the situation in Kenya, right? There's also the issue of the disparity in the prisons. Um, like in most parts of the world, men are more likely to go to prison than women are, and women make up like a really, really small portion of the people who go to prison, right? Now I don't have any statistics on if there's any sort of discrimination. No one does that much research in Kenya to do with these issues. However, I think that, obviously, because of some of the way that it's affected other countries, it's most likely going to be the same for Kenya. Yeah, so I just looked at the statistics. It's slightly less than 7% of the prisoners in Kenya are female. So 93% of them are male, right? Prisons in Kenya are really bad, really, really bad. And the women's prisons are not as bad, right? They're a little bit better. They're not as secure. They're not as, how do I say, like, depraved. The men's prisons are a nightmare. Um, so that can be an example of a gender issue, right? And yeah, so I would say that pretty much wraps up the majority of the issues of men in Kenya. Circumcision, sexual violence, domestic violence, homelessness, um, violence in general. Murder, prison. Those would be the main issues.
Yeah, so that disparity, like, that seems to be a worldwide disparity. I know in the UK, I believe that men are like 2/3 more likely to be charged and like more likely to be stopped and searched and all of these sorts of things. And then in court, they're like 2/3 more likely to be convicted, so like sentenced guilty. And then when they are convicted, they get like 66% longer sentences. And then the kind of end result of that is that if men are treated as leniently as women were throughout just the court system, not even including the police system, then 2/3 of men in prison wouldn't be in prison now, because most of them would have used up their sentences, like lived it out, because they'd be much shorter, and then a lot of them wouldn't have even gone there at all.
I think it's even worse than your statistic when you say men get 66%.
Yeah, I'm giving a conservative statistic there. I've heard 4/5 as well wouldn't be.
It's even in a way.
Any citations on that? That'd be great.
But yeah,
in a way, it's infinitely more, because for some crimes, women are outright exempt from prison altogether, and they only get a suspended sentence. So in a way, for some crimes, the percentage difference is an infinite percentage, because women get 0 time in jail and men do get time in jail.
Yeah, there's specific legal disparities, like two-tier justice system in the UK for sure. Men's prisons seem to be worse throughout the world. That seems to be the case. So, like in the UK, for example, there's a lot of conditions that are very negative. Even things as simple as food. You know, the food is being left to go off, and then they give them food with like maggots in and things like that. Yeah, I can find that for you. Sure. Later. So you've mentioned this disparity, and you keep mentioning these like issues, and it's like we can demonstrate them with these studies for sure. But unless we come up with like specific solutions, all we're doing is going like, please take it seriously. But that's not an end of itself. Like, we need to have some direction, like some solutions in mind. Like some policies that will change things, or some things you can do as an individual man, and so on. So yeah, if there's any solutions, like I know I'm putting you on the spot a bit, and it's always a difficult question. I struggle to find solutions, but yeah, if there's anything you know of that would help these issues, that would be great to hear about.
I'm going to be honest with you. One of the biggest ways we can help right now is to just have some conscious raising, and make these issues aware, because I won't lie to you, I had no idea there was even an issue. I did not even know that men had issues in the past, you know. I just didn't even know, you know. I assumed that the reason why more men were in prison is because men just commit more crimes, you know, and that just like bled into me believing that, you know, men are just out to get women, because, you know, why should they even be committing crimes in the first place, you know, that kind of thing, you know. So I think a lot of people are just ignorant about these issues, you know. Like, I actually have a little bit of a study to back this up, right? So when men were asked if they ever feel like they've been discriminated against, they say no. They're completely unaware of the sentencing disparity, or of the education disparity, you know, of the fact that according to studies, it's not women who work more than men in the home. It's actually that if you count all paid and unpaid labor, men actually work 4 more hours a week on average, you know. So there's no like.
Sorry,
There's no like.
what unpaid labor do like men do?
What I mean by unpaid labor is like when you come home and, you know, you help your spouse to wash dishes and make dinner, you know. So like when they did I think this was in the UK, when they did a counting of all the hours men spent at work, you know, at an actual job, you know, where they make money, you know, and when they and how many hours they spent fixing things at home or doing, you know, maybe lawn mowing or something, and all the hours they spent on childcare, they found that actually men were working 4 more hours a week than women, you know. So like, just to put this into perspective, most people think that it's women who are doing more who are doing more work, because you know, feminists, we have this phrase, it's called the second shift. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but it says that, you know, that woman, she's going to work the same hours as a man, and then she's going to come home, and then she's going to do all the housework, and that means that women are being discriminated against. But again, like it was a non-issue, because it's actually men who are working more than women, you know, 4 hours a week, you know, which is fine, because you know they work more paid hours, right? So you know, that's how it is on average. You know, if you ask men, and this is another thing that I had no idea about, apparently women are actually preferred when it comes to landlords and housing agents, you know. So like a study was done, and they found out that if you put a woman's name, the exact same application, but you put a woman's name, women are much more likely to get a call back, you know, for an apartment or a house, right? And that
This
Well,
actually
that's how it is in America too. Like Paul Elam coined the term "pitch the bitch." Yeah, that's how it works here.
so
oh my god, this is why I'm saying that that guy is controversial.
yeah, I don't. You see, you
Yeah, a
know,
lot of
Paul
us don't
Elam.
like
I don't
him.
like the way he phrases himself. A lot of the way he phrases himself is just not. So those stats you said were for Kenya, where landlords are more likely to call back women. Do you know what the percents are? Like how much more likely?
Oh, I don't know. That's not Kenya. This is not Kenya. That is I think the US. It's
Oh,
not
right.
Kenya.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in
Doesn't
the
surprise
US.
me at
But
all.
of course, you know, if we were to do some research, we might find that it's the same in other countries, you know, as well. Because like especially when they were using like Muslim or Arab names, you know, like the women were 50% more likely to be called than to be given a call back or to be given an email than if they used a Muslim male name, right? You know, and this is why I was raising the point that even when there's a lot of violence against people towards a particular race, women are much less likely to be affected. Like even if you look historically, and I'm not saying that there's never been violence against women, because obviously they have. It's horrible, you know. But if you compare the rate of being killed or being lynched or being a victim of a hate crime between men and women, men are much more likely to be victims of hate crimes than women. But if you ask the average man, he knows about this, 9 times out of 10, he will not know about any of it. You know? I think one of the biggest things that we can do is raise awareness, right? And then after that, we start looking into solutions for these issues. Like for example, it's not really legal for someone to discriminate based on sex in the housing market, right? So that's you know a kind of an issue which is technically illegal, right? And you know that kind of thing, you know.
The biggest issue by far that you brought up was in the beginning was the domestic violence you were talking about. That to me, of all the issues you brought up, is the biggest issue and the most shocking issue. That's definitely something in terms of raising awareness you could get men talking about on social media, maybe anonymously, you know, because you can make an anonymous account on Twitter or Reddit or anywhere or Discord with a fake name. That sounds like something that I bet a lot of men secretly do think about, but they just feel afraid to speak out in public because they don't want to be shamed, or they're so used to it they think it's normal. But by far, of all the things you said, the domestic violence stories you said in the beginning were truly shocking, and the fact that there's a whole region where it's a specific issue is even more shocking. So that I think is your starting point. That I think is the thing that you're going to get a lot of guys who they do think about it probably every day. They just don't feel like they're supposed to talk about it.
I definitely agree with you. You know, this is why I think like activism is so difficult, you know, because like you want to talk about these issues, but you're not sure what response you're gonna get. I mean, I have gotten a few thumbs up from men when I talk about things like men committing suicide and that kind of thing, and they tell me, "Wow, you're really pro gender equality," because I've never heard someone talk about men's specific issues, you know. And I tell them, "Yeah, yeah, of course I want to talk about men's issues as well." You know, so but yeah, I think it's an issue because of course no one wants to look, especially at this time in Kenya, no one wants to look like they're ignoring women's issues or anything like that, you know? Like I don't wanna whine or anything, but like these issues are so like tribalistic, you know? Because like for example, you could say, you know, I'm a feminist, you know, someone is like, why do you hate men? And then you're like, no, I'm a men's advocate too. And they're like, oh, why do you hate women? You know, like it's like people can't understand that you can genuinely care about issues without being um, like, against one gender. You know, that's what I find so difficult to understand.
That's always the first reaction I get from so many people is that, oh, you're an MRA because you hate women. And just like you said, why does caring about men's issues mean I hate women? It's so strange. And everything you're saying really does kind of confirm to me the fact that this is happening in Kenya, completely different culture and country than the US. This is not new.
Gynocentrum's universal.
This is Zad, I think we posted that picture. It was a painting from India from the 1800s of a woman beating her husband with a broom, the smile on her face. So these things, the men's rights movement, it's a lot older than people think. There was, believe it or not, people think the men's rights movement started in the 60s. The men's rights movement started in the 19th century. I found a men's rights article written in the 20s. If I can find it. So this is not new. There seems to be some kind of inherent human, I don't know if it's evolutionary, I don't know if it's just a very slowly setting cultural shift or societal learned behavior, but there does seem to be some inherent nature in humanity. Again, the women are wonderful effect, the male disposability effect. But it's just so hard to reach people about this kind of stuff.
Well,
People just don't want to hear it.
well, that's not true, but it's been like the case since civilization started.
What's not true?
Well, I mean, what you said, I mean, it seems to be more of a thing that emerged with civilization. Like, you know, tribal societies aren't like that for the most part.
Some of them are.
Yeah, some. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can find some here and there, but I mean, for the most part, like tribal societies have more like gender egalitarian roles.
Do you think there is an?
I'm not quite sure.
Do you think there's?
I mean, that's fine, man. You can look at the anthropology. You know,
Do you
it's
think
whatever.
there's an inherent gap in empathy? Do you think there's an inherent male empathy gap?
I mean, maybe not. But like, what do you mean by inherent? Like, you know, ingrained into human biology or something along those lines? Maybe.
Yes, evolutionary.
Well, I mean, maybe. I'm not sure how to. Like, if I answer one way or another, you know, how to fucking argue either way, how to fucking prove either way, right?
Yeah, so I'm of the opinion quite strongly that the vast majority of the biases and the gender roles that we have come from not from any ingrained psychology, but from the roles of like sexual reproduction. So like a woman in the past before birth control like had to pick their partners very carefully, guard their like sexual purity very strictly, because if you end up, you know, just banging some random dude who's an asshole and then ending up being a homeless like woman whose like economic opportunities are so low, with a child, like you're fucked. You're so fucked. You're more fucked than like even a homeless person is generally.
Okay,
But-
really fast. It's not a rule per se, you know, it's not written in stone, but to everyone, we do try and kind of keep the language a little bit more clean on these chats, because obviously we'd love it
my
to get.
mistake. Sorry. Yeah, sure.
It's not. Listen, when I'm off camera,
No,
believe
I
me,
was taking on board. I was taking on board.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. letting me
It's
know.
just the reason why we have that is because, you know, we want it to get reposted and linked to as many places as possible. You know, so we always hope that this gets, like, you know, sent somewhere else and reposted on Facebook or Twitter. You know, so that's kind of the only reason why.
Fair
But
enough.
the way, see, the thing is, it's like the way I see it, it doesn't even really matter today. I mean, I guess it does matter in terms of how to solve it, whether it's biological or whether it's social. Either way, the effect is the same. So let's just say we do have this inherent thing, evolutionary. We still have to change it, and let's say it is purely social, and we still have to change it. So it's what it is.
Well, I would argue that it was inevitable, and now with like, you know, birth control and birth control in particular, that those necessary gender roles and those necessary biases become less necessary. But yeah, there's certainly, like Pax was talking about anthropology. If you look at cultures that have just due to their diets, their like rate of reproduction is, they can control, they effectively have birth control because they just have plants around them that function as birth control. Then those societies tend to be like much more gender equal, and have much less like, well, the woman is the stay at home, she raises the children, and the tribe raises the children, and all of this, and like the man goes hunting and risks his life and so on. But just to give some pushback real quick to this idea that raising awareness is the largest part of this, I don't fully agree. I think that you need the awareness like in enough people to get enough people to engage in some kind of action, whether that's like voting the right way or pushing for policies or like starting charities and initiatives or even individual stuff or changing cultural norms. But there's a lot of like issues where we do have a huge awareness of it, and there are, you know, fantastic solutions that are like maybe known to a few experts, but there's no push for those solutions. So for example, like there are certain ways we could redesign like the UK justice system and how they charge sexual violence, that would like convict so many more people, that, you know, most of the sexual violence wouldn't even happen because those people that would do it over and over again otherwise end up convicted. But those solutions aren't pushed for, even though we care about sexual violence so much. We're so aware of it for women. We're like more concerned with, you know, just saying these studies over and over again of like how often are such and such raped or like whatever. So yeah, I think that people aren't going to want to listen, so it helps with raising awareness unless you have solutions in mind.
I mean, I do think that we are very much in the raising awareness stage of the movement, but solutions are something that I am hoping that people can suggest. I mean, it's just very difficult for us to suggest a solution and then enact it when the solution tends to be something that requires political support. Carry on, Kate.
Yeah, we can't enact it, but we like have to know what it would be if we could enact it, and then that will give people a vision of hope that there is actually a way out of it. It's not just that we have these horrible problems that we're stuck with.
I think Kate
Well, I mean,
had an answer. I think Kate had an answer to that.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, Okay, I understand that raising awareness is well, it's just a first start, right? Um, it's just going to be difficult because in some countries they literally extrapolate, like they banned the entire groups together. Like for example, men's rights activists, they just put them in the same basket as incels and like male supremacists, and like now they've just banned all of us and like just call us a hate group. You know, when like there's a total difference between being an MRA and like an incel. And like honestly speaking, we're portrayed so badly in the media. I don't know if you've ever seen like Do You Believe, did that video, like they had an incel come on and then they're like, "Hi, I'm an incel, ask me anything," right? Like the same incel who was in that video, they put him in a men's rights activist versus feminist video. So like now many people think that men's rights activists are the same things as incel, or that kind of thing, or male supremacists or anything like that. Like very recently they've been portraying like Cassie J and Karen Strogan like really, really badly in the media. And like okay, I don't agree with Cassie J on a few things, but like Karen is she's not really that extreme or anything, She's just trying to talk about issues, and yet like they're portraying her as if she's okay with raping women, and that kind of thing, And like when it comes to the portrayal of Warren Farrell, people are literally like when he tries to give a talk, people like are protesting against him, even though like he's really, really, really mild, and that kind of thing. Like he doesn't say anything bad about women at all, So, it's just difficult.
I mean, Warren Farrell still talks about women's issues to this day and still calls himself a feminist. It's atrocious how he's been treated. Yeah, like even before he joined the men's movement, and he was just talking about the issues that divorced men face after for so many years giving like hundreds of lectures on women's issues. He was cast out, like it was gross.
I mean, since the MRA label has been kind of tarnished, right? Do you think it's a good idea just to get rid of it? Because if all you care about is results rather than the label, then it might just be a good idea. Just something to think about.
Maybe like so. We can't just decide to get rid of it. Like we can't do that. Some will still cling to the label, and then all we'll do is fragment the movement. But like if you're talking to individual people, I would strongly recommend not saying you're a feminist or an MRA and just talking about issues.
Yeah.
So the response is so much more positive. And then, within that, you can still shout out MRA groups, you can still shout out books, you can still link talks, and all of these like brilliant charities like Mankind Initiative, which is like pretty MRA friendly. You can still do all of that stuff without necessarily getting that initial negative bias, sorry, of saying you're an MRA or whatever.
I mean, but with or without the label, without the label, yeah, there might be like more positive results in the short term, but I mean, people will raise eyebrows anyways. Like they'll give backlash anyways.
Not necessarily. It depends
Oh,
on how
yeah.
you go. It depends on how you go about it, right? I think most people, it depends on where you live, could agree upon, I would say, the major issues like suicide, circumcision, I don't know, homelessness, for example. Those are like 3 main issues. I think most people, if you spoke to them without, labeling yourself as MRA or anything like that, could
Like,
come to a reasonable
correct me
conclusion.
if I'm wrong, but like Warren I don't think he even calls himself an MRA, and yet like everyone like hated him, So
It wasn't.
I
It
mean,
wasn't
I don't know.
everybody. It was overblown. I don't think it was everybody. But yes, there's a lot of pushback from feminists because they have this idea of they want to be the original victims, the biggest. They always want to be bigger victims than men, right? And if men come up with an issue, listen, we have more problems in this area, then that defeats their narrative, which is women.
I mean, men have it worse than women in most areas in every society. So, well, I mean,
yeah, but I mean, like, you can't. I don't know about every society, but I do know in the West that's definitely the case.
I don't think you
We'll
can really
say-
quantify suffering in that. But just to what you said about
I would just like to
Sorry.
like give a little bit of a suggestion on when we're talking about one issue. Like, okay, let me give you an example, right? And this is why when I was reading Paul Elam's website, avoiceformen.com, you know, I had an issue with the way he would talk about certain things. Like, let me give you an example, right? When I suggest that when we're talking about circumcision or MGM, we don't compare it to FGM, right? We should just say that it's wrong, because what I notice that a lot of people, when people start talking about FGM and they're like, oh, you know, it's hypocritical that FGM is banned and MGM is not. People, they just dissolve into saying, wait, so you think that MGM is the same as FGM? You know, you're insane. You know, that's what I see. So I think we should, like, let me give you an example. I tweeted out hashtag end FGM on Twitter, and I had an MGM activist message me and call me a sexist, you know, because I was not saying end MGM too. And I told him it's not that I want people to be circumcised. It's just that hashtag was trending, you know. So that's why I was saying that, you know. And he was like, you know, like basically saying it's discriminatory to say hashtag end FGM, you know, like it's just a weird person, basically.
Yeah,
I can actually kind of tell you where I think he's coming from. It's exactly like you said. We're so used to having people react to us saying, "Oh, so you're saying MGM is just as bad as FGM?" My response to that is always, I wouldn't say that it's okay to cut off somebody's hand because cutting off somebody's head is worse. So I don't even get into what's worse or what's not worse. I just say it doesn't matter what's worse or what's not worse. You wouldn't say, well, if you have a broken ankle, you can't go to the ER because a broken leg is worse. Or it's okay to steal because murder is worse. It's a completely nonsensical argument. So
but like, are you excusing it or explaining it or both or what?
What do you mean?
Well, you start up by saying, well, you know, I think I understand where you're
Okay, yeah, no, let me get around to it. So I think that guy was wrong to do what he did, but he was probably kind of assuming that you were one of the people that I'm talking about, one of those feminists I'm talking about, because we're so used to that. He probably falsely made the assumption that you were one of the people who would kind of mitigate MGM or say, oh, circumcision is fine. So am I excusing it or explaining it? I suppose it's a combination of both. Obviously, he was wrong to do what he did.
I mean, but I
understand getting emotional about that issue because I've been guilty of that too in the past.
Well, I mean, I've run into similar stuff before. Well, I mean, I haven't been on Twitter lately, but you know, when I would talk about circumcision on Twitter, and I'd get you know, angry, deranged feminists, you know, getting upset that I was talking about male genital mutilation, not female. So
it's an emotional topic. It's a very emotional topic.
But it's like, yeah, you know, I guess I'm against this like habit of like, you know, intactivists or like MRA types going after like women when they're talking about women's issues, like because they do it to us. like yeah, feminists do it to us when we talk about male issues. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know what? I'm sorry. No, I'm not gonna dedicate my Twitter talking about female issues because, you know, I mean, there's already plenty of societal effort addressing those. I'm here to talk about men and advocate for men, not women.
There is an interesting sort of trend in that occasionally I will get responses, people saying, why doesn't your account talk about women? And usually I just point to my name, but I mean, it's an interesting sort of thing where they want me to talk about women. and then they want me to probably a lot of them want me to ignore men. But it's it's just kind of a lot of them want me to validate my egalitarianness by talking about female issues. Well, we do occasionally talk about female issues when they are part and parcel of male issues, like they're a mirror or they're another side of the coin. It's just something that crops up occasionally, but it's just not our focus. And we feel like there's just a huge mountain of people already talking about female issues. So really, there's more to do when criticizing people talking about them incorrectly than there is talking about actual female issues. I couldn't name a single female issue that isn't being talked about. I can name so many that male ones aren't.
To add on that, you said it's fine to it's fine to compare. I think that's why I don't think it's a bad idea to compare female circumcision with male circumcision, right? Because I think a lot of people aren't aware that there's different types of male circumcision and different types of female circumcision. So when people say you can't compare the two, I'm like, which one? Do you even know that there's different types? So like a lot of people who usually say you can't compare the two, that's about female circumcision than they do about male circumcision, quite honestly. And I think it is well worth, bringing it up to them and saying, and just, educating just a little bit and say, there's different types of female circumcision and male circumcision. Some of them are more harmful than others, and just go through the process with them and make them understand and say, do you think it's right that all across the West, even the least harmful form of female circumcision is banned, but somehow male circumcision is still allowed? And once you phrase it that way, I think a lot of times you do get them on your side. But the whole let's not compare female circumcision to male circumcision, I think that's the wrong approach. I think you should compare.
I mean, yeah, cutting genitals versus cutting genitals, man. Come on.
Yeah. That's excellent. By the way, do you want to be referred to as arrogant or ambassador? Or AA? Everyone kind of has a nickname here.
Whatever. You can call me arrogant.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. Yeah. Have you used that argument in a live debate? Do you have any field experience with that? That's very.
I've used it. I've used it on Twitter when I was advocating a little bit for a while, but that's it. I've never like used it like on a live debate or something. I've maybe.
What's the result on Twitter?
Mixed responses, but like on Discord, I've had mostly positive responses. But those were like not debates; those were just casual conversations amongst friends, And
I mean, Twitter responses are going to be insult, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Twitter is one step above Yahoo Answers.
Oh, that's a bit of a burn there, but yeah, I mean, I do think the genital mutilation debate has become so toxic because, like, we've got campaigners referring to only the most brutal forms of FGM and ignoring the brutal forms of MGM and the sheer prevalence of MGM all over the world. It's like, especially in cultures which have FGM. And I have noticed that there is, because they're focused on the most brutal kind, they're allowing the mildest kinds of FGM to creep in through the back door. And I feel that they're going to help make FGM legal by fighting against it purely because they define FGM as the worst kind possible. And we actually do have some citations about this on our citation list. And honestly, we don't want that either. We just want the whole thing to be banned. No genital mutilation of anyone without consent.
That's more of like an American problem. I mean, like Brian Earp talks about this, like, yeah, how FGM advocates are using the same arguments that circumcision advocates use to try to make FGM legal, and you have and it's gotten to the point where now you have people who are high ranking in the American Academy of Pediatrics who have become sympathizers to arguments like that, like Douglas Dikema and some of these other Jews.
Be careful with saying other Jews. I don't like that argument. I don't like making it an anti-Semitic argument because Christians do it too because of the Bible, and Muslims do it because of the Quran. So that's something that, and it should be known that there are many Jewish people who are against circumcision. As a matter of fact, when I lived in LA,
Yeah, but more
I
of
was in
them
the
are
Philippines.
pro-circumcision.
No, Pax, hang on. I'm going to finish this point here because we need to. This is something that we can't really have. When I was in Los Angeles, working in the film industry, obviously I ran into a lot of Jewish men in their 20s and 30s, and the vast majority either agreed with me or were somewhat apathetic. But I got very, very little pushback of being anti-circumcision by Jewish people. The only Jewish people who had a problem with me were feminist women or more older conservative types. And older conservative religious types, you're not going to change their mind. So it's a waste of
Well, I
time.
mean, first of all, I was talking about a specific area, which would be like the people in America who have lent sympathy to FGM supporters, who use the same arguments as MGM supporters, and those tend to be people from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and those tend to be Jewish members in the American board
I
of
have
directors
no
of the
idea if
American
that's
Academy of
true or not.
Pediatrics.
Brian Morris
I
isn't
would
Jewish.
contest if that's
The
true or not.
the
If you look at
biggest
the
pro-circumcision scientist is Brian Morris, and Brian Morris is not Jewish.
If
And
we
he's the
look at
worst
other
of the worst.
countries, we see that, like, depending on, like, all religions are in favor of circumcision. All major religions that are like Abrahamic. It's just how it goes. And you can see, for example, like in some countries, like Christians are massive proponents of MGM. So I think to focus on Jewish people in particular is maybe a bit of a mistake.
I'm not focusing
I think
on
it's
Jewish people.
Okay, guys,
problem
I hate to cut you all
Hold
off,
on.
but I think Equality's been trying to say some stuff for a while and a couple other people, and to be honest, we maybe shouldn't be going to this category of stuff, so please allow Equality to speak.
There's equality.
If she wants to speak, it seems like she's...
So oh gosh. Okay, just to quickly say, I'm LDS and we don't really go for that stuff at all. We're very against it. So I can't kind of sit here and say, oh, Christianity as a whole is all for it, because clearly it's not true. There are going to be people in different groups that don't do that. But I also just had to make a quick comment that the general use of terms for a group of people in here, it kind of makes me laugh a little bit at how quick Blue was to jump in and say that argument isn't proper. But we all kind of sit in here and we kind of generally say, oh, all feminists are like this, feminist women, MRAs. We all say it as a general thing, but yet no one comes in during those times to say anything about that being an improper way to refer to a group of people, especially when it's kind of clear that within the feminist group, it's not the entire feminist group that has these extremist views of women's suffrage inside of the world. It's a fairly small group of people that are extreme with all of their ideologies and their comments within social media and interviews and campaigns. And I think for these kinds of subjects, they have to be the ones where people are thinking about what they're saying for it to be able to be taken into a proper way. We're posting this on social media where everyone's going to be able to interpret things differently. But if we don't come in and we don't say anything about, saying, well, we're talking about the feminists inside of the feminist group that end up having these extremist comments, you need to say it like that rather than just saying feminists do this, feminists do that, because then it continues to turn into this war on men and women. And that's what I was going to comment on for Men Are Human when they made the point that, there are probably tons of, feminists or women that have come to him to ask him to talk about women's issues. And a lot of it tends to be the fact that they want there to be less of a determinant that makes this a war on gender. When we continue to push back and we fight against each other saying this happens more, this happens more, this happens more to men, this happens more to women, instead of focusing on the overall issue and trying to produce any kind of solution towards that problem. We start fighting with each other about whether or not a gender is more worthy to help than the other gender is, when in reality, both genders are worthy of help. And, you know, the longer that we continue speaking to one another like that and referring to one another like that behind closed doors, it's going to become a much larger issue. And groups like ours, where, you know, it's kind of clear that we have more and more people coming into it, so we see a lot more different opinions on certain subjects, it has to become less of a man versus woman. It has to be more of a situation where this is the issue, we need to solve it.
Absolutely agreed. I'll admit, recently there's maybe been a bit more of, how to put it in the nicest way possible, I guess, a bit more of people that are beginning to go over the line when it comes to how they treat people who join who are feminist or have feministic point of views. And to be frankly honest, we are not in any form of warfare. We choose generally to be MRAs because we understand men's issues and we realize that to make an impact, at least from our point of view, it's more likely we need to be coming from maybe the men's point of view, because some people have tried. There are, I'll admit, and I've met them, some feminists who do try to be, you know, gender equal and consider everyone, but it's not often, and it's definitely not the people running these groups or helping fund VAWA or any of these other things. And that's the major issue. And so we're trying to be inclusive because this whole idea, this whole supposed fight we're in, is not only for men, but it's also for a whole entire change of stereotypes and views and fake beliefs and revisionist history that people have made. And so, yeah, we do need to start possibly being a little bit harder on some people who are being complete jerks to some feminist members and feminist point of views.
That's exactly why I agree 100%. That's exactly why, Kate, this was such a fantastic talk, because you are an example of someone who is doing this for all the right reasons. You genuinely care about women's issues and men's issues, and so you call yourself a feminist and an MRA for completely honest reasons, and that's because that's what you are. You know, you're a true equitarian, and yeah, I agree with Dark. You know, I always say this, and I sometimes get pushback from people. There are thousands, if not millions, of feminists who are good people who would agree with us on a lot of ideological points. So the debate happens when it comes to statistics or data, but different kind of stuff. But I very much prefer a more open-minded approach, and I think that's going to work well in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about like groups, I mean, we do often talk about the worst elements in those groups, the ones who are like having the most impact negatively. And we are thinking people like Now and so on who like have done a lot of damage. I would like to say on the going back to the circumcision thing on the Jewish front, we have noticed that it's totally non-denominational. We've noticed that circumcision is totally non-denominational. It's not something that's specific to any one group. As Katie was saying earlier, it's prevalent in Kenya, and it's just the done thing. It's also prevalent in most of Africa, and it's just a done thing. So it's not really any particular one group that's causing this.
You're right about that. But if I can just give you some pushback, I mean, don't you think that the biggest pushback in Europe has been from Jews? whenever they want, whenever there's been a European country.
Like guys, let's not go back to this topic because I mean I just don't feel comfortable on much ragging on Jews, even if it's a
not-
problem
it's not
in
about-
some community.
right there.
I thought
Please,
But
they,
anyway.
let's stay away. If you want to do a private conversation of that, do that on your own time through DMs, make your own little group to speak on. Please, not here.
Yes, in fact, it can get us in trouble talking about that sort of thing.
Yeah, true.
And anyway, the most pushback I've ever seen is from the American associations that get money from it. So, but yeah, moving on from that subject. Let's
Actually,
talk about...
let me just say one last thing about this. Just remember what I said about how the most of the people I worked with who were Jewish and younger, and especially male, agree with me. So yes, most of the pushback may come from these Jewish organizations and political groups, but I would say it's just like the way the worst feminists are the ones who are part of these organizations and these so-called quote-unquote charities. They're the ones who are more politically active. And you wonder, do they really do it because they believe it, or are they just playing the politics game? So looking at a Jewish organization in Europe is the same thing as looking at something like Now in America. It's the worst of the worst people that come together and play the whole politics game. Regular people on the street, I don't think are reflective of those organizations. So that's why I'm uncomfortable with saying, oh, this is something that the Jews are doing. No, this is something that a very small Jewish organization is doing. Not something that quote unquote the Jews are doing, not something that the average person on the street is doing, because the circumcision rates are falling dramatically in Israel every single year. And there's a growing intactivist movement in Israel every single year. So yes, the more conservative religious Jewish organizations are going to say that, but you always get that. You always get the more older conservative groups pushing back against change. So that's what I would say on that.
Could I add something?
I mean,
Sorry.
so
I think we want to get off this topic, though, is the thing.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
right.
would
Yeah, please.
just like to
Yeah.
say something. A little bit on what Equality for All was saying, and what Darkisha was saying. I think that it's fine to agree with feminists or disagree with feminists. Like I don't want to stereotype all feminists or to say all feminists say this, right? So I mostly talk about what certain groups of feminists are saying. But there is one thing I would like to say though. I respect feminists. I think that they should be treated with respect and listened to. However, most feminists, and I think like 80% of feminists, or even more, especially academic feminists or really active feminists, they do believe in the theory of patriarchy and that men they do things. They've set society up in a certain way that benefits them at the expense of women, and many of them they do agree that men shouldn't be treated badly. When you usually bring up men's issues, they just say it's like male privilege backfiring, or male men get hurt by patriarchy too, but I tend to look at things from a different way. That society was not set up to benefit men at the expense of women, but rather it's in many ways set up to benefit women, right? And I wouldn't say necessarily that it causes such a big rift, right? Because you could agree with someone that men committing suicide is bad and that kind of thing, but they'll say that it's because of patriarchy, when it's not, so that's what I feel, but at the same time, you can still respect someone's opinion without agreeing with them, I just don't agree with the opinion that society set up to benefit men at the expense of women. That's what I feel.
Yeah, I mean, name me one society that operates that way.
And I mean, it's become a situation when it comes to a patriarchal society where it's kind of become a little bit more situational, a lot more about the communities you grow up in. Like I tend to not try and go into these kinds of subjects because for other people, it may be a lot harder to see it as not being set up like that. But where I live and the life that I live and the religion that I live in, it is set up like that, that women are the lower half. They are the baby makers. The moment that a woman graduates from high school, they should be looking for a nice LDS boy who she can get married to and have kids with within a year or two after graduating. Oh God. So for me, I can't really sit there and say, well, yeah, it's never going to be like that anywhere. But it's kind of become clear that it's a lot more situational, and it's going to continue to be something that's might be only readily seen and obviously seen in smaller, tight-knit groups rather than as society as a whole, especially inside of the United States. I also wanted to say that when it comes to the people that constantly make comments, or people that are very extreme, that are running charities or running the campaigns or the special events that are specifically talking about whether it's feminism or MRA or BLM, anything like that, we kind of have to acknowledge the fact that the people that get listened to are the ones that speak the most, and the people that aren't afraid to say something controversial. Same reason that some people may not have liked Donald Trump. For example, I didn't care. It wasn't really much of my business. What I wanted was somebody who was going to run the country in a proper manner. What I didn't like was his open conversations and comments that he would post out on Twitter. And that's how he got people to listen to him. That's how he stayed being the subject of every person's conversation, was that he wasn't afraid to go out there and say and call what's the name of North Korea's leader again? I don't remember.
Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un.
Jong-un.
Thank you. That person. I'm having a brain fart. He called him Rocket Man. Like, extremely disrespectful. And, and that's going to be the same way that it is when any other person makes a comment specifically about any kind of group or any kind of issue. The person that speaks the loudest is going to be the one that's heard, unless enough people are coming around to actively push back that and say the same thing of, well, that's not the case and you're being extremist. Those are the people that need to have a chance to just be humbled, rather than, again, just not going after a person that has said that and just kind of pushing that onto the entire group, because that's what ends up happening. It's the same reason why MRA can be seen as a group of incels that hate women, because they have a single interaction with somebody who, states that they're, that they are that kind of a person, and they just do not have a good interaction. And instead of the group coming out and saying, well, we don't agree with that, that's not something that we advocate for, that's not something we push for, there's no reason for any kind of person to look upon the MRA group or the feminist group and say, yeah, they don't mean any of that. They just, as long as we just sit there and we don't acknowledge anything about why we may be seen in a horrible light, we're not going to be able to have more people in support of us.
I agree completely with that. Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, that's we criticized Paul Elam earlier, and some people might say maybe you shouldn't be criticizing one of the most famous MRAs in the world, and I've had my article published to a site, but I'm still going to say this: way he conducts himself and the way he carries himself in the same way as the similar way as Trump is hurtful. And the way you present yourself matters. And the words you choose matter. People are going to be turned off by your message. Even if you have a good point, whatever you're saying, if you present it the wrong way, if you phrase it the wrong way, you're going to turn people off. So, is it fair to criticize some feminist groups for the things that they say and do? Yes, it is. It's fair to criticize the things that they say and do. But should you quote it as they are, quote, begging to be raped? No, you should not, for extremely obvious reasons. And Donald Trump, even when he was right about something, so often the way he would say it, I would just cringe. It was just awful. And when he got into that Twitter debate with Greta Thunberg, you're the president of the United States, and you're starting a Twitter beef with a 16-year-old. Are you kidding me? It was absolutely ridiculous to watch that. So that's, something that we're very conscious of here. You have to be palatable, and you have to be professional, and you have to conduct yourself with a proper decorum. Otherwise, people just won't take you seriously.
I just want to go back to something quickly that Dark Aisha, I'm not quite sure how to say it, and Equality for All talking about in terms of not making it a men versus women thing. So when I have discussions on like men's issues, I don't have discussions on men's issues. I just have discussions on issues. So I'll talk about sexual violence generally and have like a 20-minute conversation on the different ways, people are impacted and like what can we do to help them. And that will include like, the ways that men are mistreated by the justice system, or, it'll include like all facets of that. And if you're known as a person who talks about the issues of all groups, and that's not just men and women, that could also be like elderly or the disabled or like anything, then you're not going to be viewed with this suspicion when you start talking about men's issues quite so much. So that's just, something to consider. Like maybe when you want to bring up a men's issue, maybe just talk about the issue generally and still bring up those points as well.
I mean, yeah, I entirely agree with that, if we come to this as saying we're going to talk about this issue and not say it's a men's issue or it's a women's issue, and, we talk generally about a bunch of different subjects, then there's no reason for anybody to assume that we specifically only talk about one thing. It's the entire reason behind my name. I have Equality for All. I have a fist for BLM. I have a mother and a baby for, pregnant women who have issues in society with breastfeeding. I've got a sign for men. I have a sign for women, and I have a sign for children, because I brand myself as being somebody who genuinely cares about researching different topics. And even if I get into an argument with someone about something, I go back and I go and do more research to try and see if I can find anything to allow me to agree with them on something, to allow me to completely understand what their points are. That's the entire point of a discussion. That's the entire point of having any kind of interview with somebody, or just talking to someone. If you have that kind of an argument, the entire point is to go back and to learn from it and to learn what more you can if there's something you genuinely don't understand. But there's obviously a very clear line from a discussion and just arguing and being rude with one another. I've done debate my entire high school time that, I started off as a freshman and went through my senior year doing debate. And while it's an organized discussion, that is the entire point of it. Because while we're sitting there and we're arguing, because I did Lincoln Douglas, we're sitting there, we're arguing against each other and we're trying to prove each other wrong. But the entire time we're never disrespecting one another, because the entire point of the debate is to see the different sides of an issue. And even when you're in debate, you don't get to just do one side. You don't just get to do the affirmative where you are for that issue, or you are, you want this issue to be gone. You don't always get to argue that. You also have to argue negation, where you go and you have to go and research stuff that is going to be against your own personal ideology of that subject. That's entirely important. And I get some people, you're not going to convince everyone, but the point is that you at least make an effort to listen to what they're saying, acknowledge what they're saying, and have a discussion on what each person's saying.
It's also why they offer cross-examinations when you do professional debating and periods to just be able to speak upon the other person's issues, so that way you can point out what they might have said correctly, what they might have said wrong. The whole point is, although you try and prove each other wrong, in a certain sense, you're also finding an answer, I guess, to say that works for both sides.
So, probably going to be closing this down pretty soon. We're going on over 3 hours. This was probably the longest chat I think we've ever had. Kate, this was a phenomenal interview. And I know the last hour was kind of more free discussion, but the first 2 hours were some of the most informative of my entire life. Thank you so much for doing this. I absolutely want to do a video interview with you in the future for my YouTube channel. And I can go back and listen to this and kind of pick out some questions so we can kind of have a more organized structure. But this was amazing. I mean, the information you have is absolutely amazing. This is really, really cool. I think this is the first time I ever remember an African country being the discussion of the men's rights movement. It was just absolutely fantastic. So thank you very, very much. And this is going to be posted to YouTube. I think people are going to really like this one. But yeah, I'm going to say what Darkisha just said about being more civil and having proper communication is so much better. You get so much better results when you have a real conversation. Just look at how my debate with Sam Cedar, how many of his own fans turned against him for the way that they treated me. And contrast that to my debate with Vaush. Yeah, I got a little bit heated, but at the same time, we kept it civil and the reaction was so much better and so much more positive. So always remember that the way that you act as an individual, whether it's fair or not, does reflect your beliefs and your ideologies. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a feminist or an MRA or a Muslim or a Christian or black or white, whatever it is, there are people in the world who will judge your identities, your race, your religion, your beliefs, whatever it is, based on your individual actions. Whether it's fair or not, whether it's logical or not, that is how people are going to think. People are going to see you that way. So always remember that every single day you represent you and everything about you. And so I think it is better to approach feminists with a more civil tone. And look what happens when you do. I mean, Kate is an example of someone who was willing to not completely change their beliefs, but evolve and learn new information. And a lot of people mentally wouldn't have been able to handle that. But Kate, I am so impressed by this interview. I'm so impressed by you. I'm so impressed by the things that you've said. And this was fantastic. So thank you so much. Everyone that came, thank you so much. Again, this is going to be on YouTube if you want to watch the whole thing from the beginning. I recommend that you do. This might be my favorite chat we've ever done. Gotta say, this was really, really fascinating. I learned a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you too, and it's been great having you. If anyone wants to do a similar thing or can nominate somebody who wants to do an interview on here, we can set something up. Please just DM one of the staff and they'll get right back to you, and we can, get you on a Friday stream, or if you can't make it, we can do something else. We're very flexible in that regard.
Would you guys be interested in Eric Clapper?
In who, sorry?
Having like some kind of interview with like Eric Clapper.
I'm not sure who
Who's-
that is.
Who is Eric Clapper?
Oh, he's a guy who made that Intactivist play. What was it, like 3 years ago? Harvard. Yeah, he was part of Harvard staff, and yeah, he was fired from his job for that play.
All right. You'd have to send me a DM with some info about it. But thanks
Yeah,
for the suggestion.
Yeah, all the things you said about Kate was lovely, Blue, but she has gone to bed, so you might want to DM her about setting up an interview or whatever. Yeah.
Okay then. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Same time, PM meantime. So that's about midday in American time. Good night, everyone.
Cheers. Yo, Tao, how have you been, man? Spent some time.